Many of us, most of us probably have nativity scenes at home. There's usually some kind of a wooden structure, a wooden building, and a figure of Joseph and of Mary and of baby Jesus, and some shepherds and some animals. But I've noticed as I've looked at different nativity scenes that the animals vary from nativity set to nativity set. Sometimes there's cows there. I don't know if you have cows in your nativity set. I suppose it's because it was a stable. They assumed there were cows there, or maybe it was the song Away in the Manger, because the cattle were lowing and the poor baby waked. Maybe that's why they have cows there, I'm not sure. There's a donkey usually in the stable, and the donkey carried Mary to Bethlehem, so it makes sense. There were sheep there, and I don't know if there were sheep at the stable when Jesus was born, but in my nativity set, the shepherd has a little sheep around its shoulders and just carried it there from the field. And then sometimes nativity sets will have camels there for the wise men coming in their camels, even though that took place a long time later. Well, how about bears? Have you ever seen bears? And do you have a bear at your nativity set? No? Well, Kathy Gebert of Sioux Falls, South Dakota says that along with the sheep and the cows and the donkey, her family's nativity set has a stuffed, plump little teddy bear that sits there at the manger scene and pays tribute to baby Jesus. And she said this is how it happened. She goes, one year when they were reading the Christmas story and her oldest son was able to read, he wanted to read the story. And as a beginning reader, her son Billy was a little bit halting and choppy and slow in his reading. And one night, as Billy was reading the family devotions from Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, he read, "Behold, a virgin shall be with child and bear." And before she should get bear a son, before she could get a son out, he stopped at bear. The 3-year-old daughter immediately interrupted and said, "A bear?" And the 5-year-old said, "We don't have a bear in our manger." And the 3-year-old said, "Here, use mine," and offered her teddy bear. And from that year on, the teddy bear has been a part of the nativity scene for the Geppert family. A teddy bear may be an unusual addition for a nativity scene, but what would you think if you went to a fine department store and bought a very expensive nativity set, a box set, and you brought it home and you opened it up and you were setting it out there for display as you prepared for Christmas, and along with all of the other animals that you pulled out, the cow and the donkey and even the camels, if you pulled out a red dragon, what would you think? Especially if this red dragon had 7 heads and 10 horns, and it was enormous, a large red dragon. What would you think? I know if I do something like that, I would think that either somebody at the factory had made a terrible mistake or they were playing a practical joke on me. But we have been reading through the New Testament together as a church, and we are almost to the end. And recently we've read Revelation chapter 12, and that's our passage for this morning. Might be a strange Christmas passage, but really it isn't. Because actually Revelation chapter 12 is another rendition of the Christmas story. In Luke 2, we read about 2 poor visitors who go to Bethlehem and they have to have their child born in a stable. And in that passage, we have a warning that this child would cause great turmoil in Israel, and a sword would pierce the mother's soul. And then in Matthew chapter 2, we have a second rendition of the birth of the Savior. And that's where we read about a baby boy that was born in Bethlehem that threatened King Herod, and that the baby and the family had to escape to Egypt while all of the little boys born in Bethlehem and the area were killed. And then here in Revelation chapter 12, we have a third account of the birth of the Savior. And in this story, there is a pregnant woman who is threatened by a giant red dragon who wants to devour the baby as soon as the baby is born. And what's interesting is, as you look at these three accounts, no matter what version of the story the Bible tells about the Savior's birth, there is always danger. There's danger in each story. We find in each story the universal struggle between God and Satan, between good and evil. Luke 2, Matthew 2, and especially in Revelation 12 tells us that the birth of this baby that we're celebrating this morning is of ultimate importance. In fact, the birth of this baby that we're celebrating this morning is of cosmic importance. Revelation 12 tells us that 2,000 years ago, when Mary gave birth to this baby, the entire universe took notice. Events happened in earth and on heaven. Angels and demons and shepherds and wise men all took notice when this baby was born. Now, as we look at this passage, it's interesting to note that Revelation 12 takes the ministry of Jesus. It takes it from his birth to his ascension into heaven after his death and resurrection. It collapses it into one verse. From Jesus' birth to his ascension is told in one verse in Revelation chapter 12, and that is verse 5. I'd like to read that verse for you. Verse 5 says, "And the woman who is pregnant, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne." Jesus was born, the event we're celebrating this morning, in that verse. And then verse 5 records that he was snatched up to heaven. And that phrase, snatched up to heaven, describes his ascension to the right hand of the Father after the resurrection. Actually, Romans chapter 12 is an amazing chapter. It has three main characters in it: the pregnant woman, the red dragon, and the baby. And this chapter has three amazing scenes. The first scene is the birth of the baby. The second scene is the expulsion of the dragon from heaven. And the third scene is the dragon attacking the woman and her offspring. Let's look at the three main characters in our passage and then look at the three scenes. First, the pregnant woman. In Revelation chapter 12, the pregnant woman is the nation of Israel. In the Old Testament, Israel is constantly pictured as God's wife. In Isaiah, in Jeremiah, in Ezekiel, in Hosea, Israel is God's wife. This pregnant woman represents the faithful people in Israel who've been waiting for the Messiah. And just as pregnancy is a time of waiting, God's faithful people in Israel were waiting for the promised Messiah to be born. The child that was born, the second character in Revelation 12, is Jesus. Only Jesus' birth would affect all of heaven and earth like this baby's birth does. Only Jesus will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, as verse 5 says this baby will. And only Jesus was swept to heaven to sit on his throne next to God. And the third main character in this passage is the enormous red dragon. Verse 9 tells us that this great dragon is the devil, or Satan, who leads the world astray. Those are the three main characters in Revelation chapter 12. Now, the first scene in Revelation 12 is the birth of the baby boy. Again, this scene takes place in verse 5, but it's verses 1 through 5 are setting it up. And verse 5 says again, "She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne." Satan did try to destroy the baby at his birth. We know this, as Herod tried to slaughter all the young boys in Bethlehem and the surrounding areas. But nothing stopped Jesus from being born, and nothing stopped him from what he was sent to do. And when he was done, he ascended into heaven, or was snatched up into heaven. That's scene 1. Scene 2 is Satan being thrown out of heaven. And we find this in verses 7 through 9 of the passage. And we read about a battle in heaven where Satan and his angels fight the angel Michael and the angels that are working with Michael.